Francis, you know, you wrote about in your wonderful book, The Language of God, the anthropic principle, which has become quite a hot topic among physicists in their own community, among philosophers and theologians, and as they interact among each other. One of the expressions of it is the so-called Stronganthropic Principle, which says something to the effect that the universe must bring forth life and indeed intelligent, sentient mind. Do you agree with that?
Here we're getting into sort of woolly philosophy, and I must say the definitions of strong and weak anthropic principles have not always been very edifying to me. The whole term, in fact, is a little confusing because the anthropic principle seems to imply that you're starting from the fact that we're here and trying to work backward into how that happened. I find it easier to think about this from looking at the data to say, okay, how might things have been put into place as far as these 15 physical constants that determine how matter works, and what would it have been necessary for those constants to have as their precise values in order for a certain stable universe that was more than just random particles to have come into being. When I see that those have been set in a way that seems incredibly improbable. We live on this knife edge of improbability. I find that fascinating, and it drives me very much in the direction of seeing that there may have been a purpose. Even Stephen Hawking says this, to the fact that they did occur in a certain way that allowed atoms, molecules, stars, galaxies, planets, and you and me to become a reality. But did that have to be in the strong anthropic sense? No, of course not. It seems to me the universe could have had any of those particular constants that it chose to. We have no theory at the present time, and I don't see any coming along soon, that would say they had to have those values in order for certain principles of physics and mathematics to be achieved.
So what follows from that?
It follows from that you have two options, basically. One is to say there was an intention here. There was a design, and the design included choosing those constants in a very narrow band of possibility in order to make things possible like us. And that sounds like a designer God who had very explicit intentions for his universe. Or you're forced into this other multiverse hypothesis, which says, well, you know, maybe there's an infinite number of universes with an infinite number of possibilities of what those constants are.
Of which one or
we
more.
happen, to live in one, which made life possible, of course. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. That requires a lot of faith. For me, that if you want to sort of take probabilities and assign them, I find the multiverse hypothesis a lot more difficult to digest than the God hypothesis. Admittedly, I like the God hypothesis for multiple other perspectives, but I do think for an atheist, this is a problem. This is not something to be dismissed lightly. This really creates a serious question about how this could have happened in just this way. And I don't think that ought to be sort of knocked off the table as irrelevant.
God and the multiverse are not mutually exclusive. God, in fact, could work through a multiverse, just like he works through the multitude of different speciation that we find on Earth, no?
No, you're absolutely right. It doesn't sound very economical, but there's no reason God has to be economical if he doesn't choose to be. So certainly God could have created an infinite number of multiverses, knowing that somewhere in there we're going to be the ones that he most was interested in if, as I believe, he was interested in human beings that he could have a fellowship with ultimately.
Is there an analogy with the enormous speciation on Earth?
I hadn't thought of it before, Robert, but it is an interesting kind of concept. Maybe God is not that interested in having everything be just so in a narrow, linear way, that God celebrates diversity of species, maybe of universes, in a way that reflects his ability to do whatever he pleases.
We seem to have this tension between a God who we want to be very efficient with resources, and on the other hand, perhaps an aesthetic God who celebrates diversity and maybe some abstractness and maybe not so much linearity as we seem to like.
Of course. And isn't that a human tendency to take God, if we try to conceive of him at all and attach to him human characteristics, to anthropomorphize God is something that we've been doing for a long time. And I think even though at a certain intellectual level, we have to stand back and go, well, wait a minute, that can't be right. God has got to be a lot more mysterious than our minds can contemplate. We still do it, and we still try to put him, therefore, in a narrower box than he ought to be in. And certainly in this regard, who knows what his purposes might be in the diversity of the universe and maybe other things beyond it. We just have to accept as believers that there was a purpose. I certainly see that as a foundational principle.